hidden away and secretive, and more so now in this day and age. They have to protect themselves. They're almost on the verge of being eliminated altogether. And they've gone way back in the bush into areas that humans just never go to anymore. And these are the areas that they're in today. And because of that fact that no one ever goes into these areas, they're fairly safe. But there'll only be a handful, and those that are there are hanging on very, very carefully. And if they keep on going like this, they'll be eliminated. They'll just die out. They can inbreed, which has saved them from getting too inbred. And in their present state, they need to be really harnessed and put in a semi-captive breeding program somewhere on an island where they're safe from human predation. And this is the only way you're going to save it, because the way it is going to die out. But there are still a handful there. I don't know how many. I wouldn't even hazard a guess. But the important thing is I know they're there and they're hanging on. And that's the situation at the present time.
Well, keep looking, Col. We're not going to be able to save them if we can't find them. So it's a very interesting read, mate, and thank you for taking us through it this morning. Very, very interesting descriptions too, Lano. Very, very intense experience, obviously.
Obviously, it's just a shame Col didn't have a camera in his hand when he saw it, isn't it? Now, the new procedure called lunch.
We're at Arthur River. Col's come up to have a look at some of the work that I'm doing. I'm very happy that he can come up to have a look, because often I get the feeling that he's down there. He might feel like he's on his own, a lone voice to defend the tiger, but happy that he's come up and he can see that he's not the only one. Anyway, we do have some questions here, and we'll just answer them on video and see how we go. So fire away. What's the questions you got?
How did you first become interested in the tiger?
Do you feel like answering? Oh, there we go. Well, I was always interested in Australian native animals, and I suppose the tiger was always a big mysterious one, and I was always annoyed that I wasn't able to see it because hunters had hunted them out. And I had a business which went fairly well, and after I sold that I had enough money to retire basically, and then decided what to do, and I decided to come down to Tasmania and look for the tiger. And at first, of course, it seems like an impossible thing because everybody's saying it's extinct. What do you reckon, Col?
Well, I've always been interested in animals, and I grew up on a dairy, so cows were my main love. And then I became very interested in emus for some reason, and I was canoeing along the Coorong early one morning in the summer of 1967, and I seen a strange dog-like animal walking along the shores of the Coorong, and I looked at it through binoculars for some minutes and got up closer and looked at it again, and then it disappeared up through the sandhills, and it got me wondering what sort of animal it could have been. It was like greyhound-like, but it had a big head and short legs and a longish body and a long tail. I didn't see any stripes though, and I wondered what it was. And when I got home, I found that there were many reports of a similar sort of animal being seen throughout the southeast of South Australia, and that was roundly being called a Tasmanian tiger by the Adelaide Advertiser. And so it fell in the line that I had seen a Tasmanian tiger, but to this day I'm not sure what it was. But what was the motivation that started me on my search.
Right, what's next?
Can you give us a brief summary of the work you did in the early days?
Well, I spent a lot of time on the east coast of Tasmania, and it's very difficult, of course, wandering around looking for something that's supposedly extinct. And again, it doesn't help when so many people are saying that it is extinct. For somebody who's enthusiastic, going out in the bush to look for it, when you keep getting all these voices chip away at you to say that it's extinct, that you're wasting your time, it was a very depressing thing to do, to walk around in the bush looking for something that's probably gone. Very lonely thing to do. But I spent about 4 years, I suppose, walking around the east coast of Tasmania, looking at the bush, trying to understand what kind of traces the tiger would leave. And you see, the trouble is nobody knows. So I basically had to understand every other animal first before I could get an understanding of what to avoid, what wasn't tiger, and then I could try to figure out what was. It was very difficult, very disturbing, very very lonely, depressing, and I had bouts of depression because of it. That was on the East Coast, and I basically, after 4 years or so, I'd given up. I really found there was just nothing I could do, and so then I did a bit of a tour over here on the West Coast, just for something different to look at, because a lot of the history is here, a lot of the tiger history, and eventually driving around some back roads, I eventually did manage to see one, and everything led from there.
Well, after I seen this one on the Coorong, I was very interested to know all I could find out about it. There wasn't much to find out back in the early 70s, late 60s, and not a lot had been written about it. And so I contacted an old trapper named Elias Churchill who lived in South Hobart, and got a lot of information off him, and I followed around and followed up the sightings of these tigers, supposedly tigers being seen in the Coorong in South Australia, and I began to build quite a big dossier up about it. And over the coming 20 odd years I found out a terrific lot about it without actually searching for it in Tasmania. I came across several times to gather information, but it wasn't until 1990, when we moved across, that I actually started looking in earnest for the tiger. Wasn't much looking to be done in South Australia, because to this day I don't really believe it could be there, but at least the animal I've seen propelled me into this search. But it wasn't until I got to Tasmania that I was in tiger territory, because I don't really believe it's on the mainland, but I'm certain it's here, no doubt about it.
Oh.
Well, I don't know.
What's the next question?
What did you see?
What did I see? Well, it was around 2002, and as I say, I did a bit of a tour of northwest Tasmania just for something different, just to look at a lot of the history and do a bit of a drive around some of the back roads. And I did stopping to have a look in a quarry, like a muddy patch where there was some possibility of some footprints, and there were just the usual things: wombat footprints, devil footprints, and I got back in the car and drove around the corner, and the strategy actually was to drive fairly fast, because I'm thinking if this thing's here somewhere and people don't see it very often, then it must get off the road every time a car comes around the corner. So I was driving fairly fast to come around the corner. It was a very windy day, and I did see a strange animal on the track, and I knew it was something out of the ordinary, but I didn't think it was a tiger, of course, because they're extinct, as everybody says. But so I had two choices. I actually had a video camera on my lap. I had two choices, and one was to either grab the camera and start it filming and record whatever this animal was, but of course I didn't think it was a tiger. So the other choice was to drive fast and get a close look at it before it took off, and that's what I decided to do. And I drove even faster up to it and get a good look at it as it ran off the track, and it was a tiger. It was a juvenile Tasmanian tiger. I could see it plain as day, and as it ran off it was sniffing the road at first when it saw me come around the corner, and it looked up, and it was startled because where it actually was, there was a creek going across the road, so the noise of the bubbling water muffled the sound of the car coming around the corner. But it did see me come, and it looked up, and it took off across the side of the road, and it jumped about 3 metres across a gutter cutting, and as it flew through the air, I remember seeing its tail swing round in the air like a cheetah does when it chases things like a cat. They use their tail for balance. It did that as it jumped through the air, and I could see the shape of it was unmistakable, and I could see its eye. It had a very dark eye, a very large black eye, and I'd say it was the size of an American pit bull terrier. So not particularly big, but quite chunky, and about that kind of size. And it took off into the bush, and I stopped the car, slammed the brakes on, I got my camera, and I ran into the bush, and I was hoping that it was just crouching somewhere in the bush and I could get film of it as it took off, but that didn't happen. It was already gone. So anyway, the next day I had some bait, some roadkill bait on the road, and I was preparing to have a long night of filming. I had a camera with a filter on the front of it, an infrared filter. So I was preparing to film all night to wait for this thing to come back. Anyway, it was about 5 o'clock, and I was just going to wash my hands in the same creek, and I looked down the track, and I could see further down the track a different animal entirely. This was an adult, and it was big. It was the size of a panther. It was a fair way away, probably at least 100, 150 metres away. But to me, it looked, looking at the guideposts on the side of this track, it almost looked as high as a guidepost, which, you know, it was a big animal, quite long in the body. So this was different from the one I'd seen before, but still unmistakably Tasmanian tiger. So there was two in the same area, a day apart, and this thing was big, and I could understand why the early colonists were scared of it, because it was a big and creepy animal that walked in a very creepy way. That's what I saw. What do you reckon, Col?
Col, what did you see? What did you see?
Well, this tiger hunting business is a pretty frustrating thing. For 5 years I felt I was bashing my head against the wall. I gathered a terrific lot of information. I knew a lot about the animal, but I'd seen no proof that it was still there. And I was starting to get second thoughts. And in 1993, I got a phone call, an anonymous phone call from a bloke who reckoned there's an old chap feeding Tasmanian tigers on his property in the World Valley, and I thought, oh, rubbish. And I was tempted to just toss it aside, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought I ought to look it up. And I had a description of where he lived, a vague description. So early one morning I got in my car and I drove across through Hobart. There's no road across from Maydena to the Huon. You've got to drive right down through Hobart and across to the World Valley, and I searched for about an hour and a half, and eventually I found this property. And I parked the car on the side of the road and walked in, and this old bloke comes out. Oh, he was a wreck. He needed a good shave and a good haircut, and his clothes were patches on patches. He was a mess. He was about almost 80 years of age, I suppose. And he didn't want me on the property. He made it very, very clear. He tried to kick me out. And I wasn't going to be defeated that easy. I'd come a long way. And I said, have you been feeding Tasmanian tigers on this property, mate? He said, oh, Scott, he said, of course I haven't. He said, do they exist? And I said, sure they exist. And I let him have both batteries, both barrels, what I believed. And he listened, and to my surprise, he didn't, denounce me. He said, well, son, he said, look, he said, how would you like to step into the van and have a cuppa with me, and we'll talk about this. And he had this little tiny weeny 12-foot caravan, and so I got in and sat at this little tiny table, and he got his self together and got a cup of tea, and we sat down and we were talking away, and nothing particular. He prodded me for like find out who I was and what I was, and anyway we've been talking a while, and he reached down and under his bed, and he pulled out this cardboard box and he sat it on the table, and I thought, oh, we can look some old photos. I love old photos, historical photos. And he took the lid off it, and he pulled out this perfect, almost perfect animal skull. And I recognised it straight away, THYLACINE. And a shiver went down my back, and I said, where did you get that? And he said, look, son, he said, I'm going to ask you a few questions. He said, what is this and why is it? And so I went through it. I described the dentition, the elongated nose, the zygomatic arch, and he said, he said, do you really believe they're still there? I said, yes, I do believe they're still there. And he said, well, I want to tell you they are. And he said, look at that window behind you. I looked out the window, and all I could see was nothing, because there was much dust on it. So I scraped the dust away, and I could see these blue hills of the world in the background. And he said, you reckon you're man enough to tackle that? And I said, yeah, I reckon I am. He said, well, if you are, he said, I'll tell you a story. And with that, he told me the most amazing stuff I'd ever heard. And at that point, my whole conception changed, because I had a new direction. And apparently he and his father, he came back after the war, and they went up in 1946 into the World Valley trapping, and they found a Tasmanian tiger dead in a rock crevice with two young. The young were still alive, but they were starving and freezing. It was very cold weather. And he said they stuffed them in their shirts and took them in their jumpers and took them back to the farm. And I said, oh yeah, I half believed him. And he said, and we fed them on cow's milk. I thought, well, there's another no-no, because you don't feed a tiger or a marsupial on cow's milk. Anyway, he rambled on, and the more he told me, the more I started to believe, because he was so sincere about it. And he said, when I was handling the skull, he said, don't drop it, son, it's the only one I've got. And I thought, well, how many of these are you going to have? Because you never see them outside of a museum. And it was almost like a death in the family. And he said, well, these two young ones, he said, we took back after a while because they got pretty adventurous and tried to break out, and we let them go. And he said, ever after we were trying to find, we didn't purposely look for them, but every time we were out trapping, we were on the lookout. And he said it was years and years before we actually see any sign of another one. And he described each stage of their journey into the world. And although they couldn't say they'd ever seen these two young tigers again, they did see others. And as late as a few years before that, he said, I'm getting too old to go back in there now. He said, son, I want you to go in and find out if they're still there. And I said, well, you give me the area where to go and I'll go in. But he didn't pinpoint an area. He gave me a broad description. He said, you go to the Snake River and you turn right and go in towards Mount Ann. And so for the next 2 years, I tried to get through the bush, and you think I could. It was full of horizontal and bower, and I had no hope. And I bashed my guts out for the next couple of years trying to get into this area. And then I thought, well, I've got to do something different. I wasn't getting anywhere, so I tried a new tack. I went around a different way and came in from an actual road under Mount Ann and walked across through all this inhospitable country, and it took me a couple of days to get in there. When I got in, I camped alongside the Snake River, and that night, early that morning, the next morning, I heard the unmistakable sounds of hunting thylacine. It's a high-pitched, terrier-like yip-yip. The mother calls the young answer back, and I heard that 3 or 4 times that night. And I knew then that there could possibly be thylacines in that area. The next morning I wasn't prepared for what happened. I was standing there having a wee, quite a wee, and I was looking around. I packed my haversack and thought I'll have a look around before I leave, and I'm standing there indisposed kind of thing, and out from the bushes came this animal and shot straight back in again. Only seen it's a fraction of a second, and I thought, that's a brown cattle dog, and I called it up, walked to the edge of the ferns and called it up, and I could see it moving away into the ferns, so I followed it in, called it up again, whistled it, no response, and I was only about 20 to 30 feet behind it, and suddenly it half turned, like on the cover of my new book, half turned, and it glared at me. And then I thought, well, this is something strange. I looked at the head and then ran my eyes down the back and then to the tail, and I could see the thick hand stripes, and then the penny dropped and I froze. I went into shock. If you've ever been in shock, you know what I mean. And I just stood there frozen to the spot and watched this animal glare at me. And I thought, hello, it's going to have a go, because it wrinkled its nose in a snarl, and then it turned and walked away, and then it did something strange. It wheeled right around and stood facing me dead on. And I thought, oh, I'm going to get it now, because I was only from here to that bank away from it. And the thing just glared at me with these big, featureless, dark eyes. There's no expression, and it snarled again. I thought, hello, it's going to go. And I'm taking all this in, because it's happened over maybe 20, 30 seconds. It wasn't any short 5-second thing. And then it started to backtrack, and this crazy side-to-side motions. It backed into the ferns and out of sight, and I could see it, the ferns moving as it moved away. And I just stood there dumbfounded. I was lightning struck. I thought I'd go after it, try and trace it, but then I thought, no, I won't. I sat down, had a real strong cup of coffee, and got myself together. And then I thought, now I'll see where that went. But I couldn't find any tracks. There's too much leaf litter and that. And that was my sighting. And it took me 5 years to get to that point. 5 years of frustration. Before that moment, I was ready to toss it all in, because I thought, well, I'm just a bit like Greg. I'm just bashing my brains against a rock here, and I'm not getting anywhere. And that's the way you get. But you need something to spur you on, and that was my spur. That was what I needed. And from that point on, I believed emphatically, and I've been saying ever since. And only the following year, I was interviewed by Craig Wellington for this new documentary. And although I didn't say I'd seen it, I made it clear that I believed it was still there, and I still do. And I've heard it, and I've smelled it, and since, and I know, with 110% today that the animal is still here.
Well, the good thing about having Col and I together is we can compare our sightings, the things that we did see, and we have talked a lot about it. And the colour of what I saw was dark brown, kind of like a it's difficult to describe, like I suppose a cinnamon colour, or a it was quite dark. You know, you see the classic colour of a thylacine is supposed to be yellowish or dirty grey or browny grey or browny yellow. This thing was quite dark brown, and I couldn't see the stripes on either of them, the ones that I saw, but one was running when it was close and the other one was a fair way away at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so I'm not surprised that I didn't see the stripes. Now Col says the colour of the one that he saw was exactly the same.
Yeah, it was a cinnamon colour brown, very distinctive. It wasn't any yellow grey, it was definitely brown, dark orangey brown. And this was about a half an hour after daybreak, so the light was fairly good and I could see it plainly, but it certainly wasn't any yellow grey. It was a cinnamon type of brown, like a bay horse. And the stripes stood out on it. They weren't black, they were dark brown, but they definitely had stripes. I could see the stripes. Where the first one I seen on the Coorong, I seen no stripes, if it was a tiger, but I seen the shape of the animal, and this one was a similar shape, but it was a whole different scenario, and I seen it much clearer.
Yeah, the other thing that's worth talking about is Col said he was dumbstruck by it, and that's precisely what happened to me. The second one that I saw, the adult, the following day, I had a camera in my hand, and I saw it down the track, and I knew what I was looking at, but you go through at least a few seconds where you have to get in your head clear what you're actually looking at, and I almost felt that I didn't need to film it because there was tiger everywhere here. It was only a matter of time and I'd get one easily. So I almost felt that rather than film it, I'd just spend the time, those few seconds. I only saw it for 5-6 seconds. I'd spend that looking at it myself. But then it dawned on me, I got to get it filmed. So I lifted up the camera and turned on the switch of the camera. But this was a type of video camera that takes a while to get going. So it was a bzz, 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 buzzing, and the very moment that it started recording, the animal's tail disappeared in the bush. And what can you do? That's what happened. So what's our next question?
What are you going to do now? Or what are you doing now?
What are we doing now? Well, I've since I saw those two, that was 2002, I've spent every day since I've had either cameras in the bush or other strategies as well to try to, initially in the early days, because this whole idea that the thing's extinct, you need extraordinary, so many people are saying it's extinct, you need extraordinary proof. It's got the stage now where a photo, that certainly was back then, the idea that a photo won't be proof. You can doctor a photo on a laptop computer. So I sort of I gave up on the idea of using a camera to prove the thing exists, because again, that's not proof. A photo's not proof. What do you do? And of course, I had a lot of time to think about it. Before I even ended up there, I'd spent 4 years on the East Coast thinking about walking around by myself, thinking about what's the best thing for this animal. You know, why am I looking for it? You know, analysing every aspect over and over again. Why am I there? Am I there for the tiger or for me? And what am I trying to do to prove it exists? Why am I trying to do that? And it was fairly obvious even from the start that society is not going to protect an animal it thinks is extinct. So the aim was to prove that it's there for the animal only. It was never about money. You know, I had retired from a business, so money wasn't an issue. It was purely and simply about trying to help the animal. So that was 2002 when I saw those animals, and now it's 2014. So you've got 12 years since then, and I've been busting my guts trying to prove that that thing still exists, and I've tried every conceivable method and I haven't been able to do it. But, you know, I haven't given up. Here we are, sitting here doing an interview in 2014. Neither of us have given up. Right now, I've got 100 I think there's 107 cameras in the bush, and Col came out with me a few days ago. We had a look at that, went through the process of servicing some of those. They're spread over a pretty wide area. Right now they're over 1/4 of Tasmania, the northwest quarter of Tasmania, and I've got plans to, if it becomes a sensible thing to do, I've got the money to buy another 500 cameras. They're a lot cheaper now, so the money's there. The question is, it's not so much about money, it's about whether it's a sensible thing to do or not. So I'm just tossing up whether to go to that next level. But right now, as I say, the northwest quarter of Tasmania has got 107 cameras in it, and but so far I've taken, since I got into serious camera work in 2006, and that's when I made come to the conclusion that I couldn't prove it any other way than by getting a photograph. And that's when I had to think, okay, if that's the only way, then how can you make a photograph proof? How is it possible to use one photograph as proof? And that's when I started to think about providing a whole heap of background information as well as a photograph, a whole heap of stuff to go with it. If you're going to prove the antiquity of an object, the value of it is judged by the story that comes with it, the story behind it. So I wrote a 1,000-page book to go with this photograph, so that all I need to do is slot the photograph into this book, and that provides a 1,000-page story leading up to it of how that photograph came to be, the whole story of the tiger, the history of it in Tasmania, and the history of the work that I've done, so that I'm not presenting a photo anymore, I'm presenting a whole heap of background information to go with it. And then the question arises, why would this bloke do all this work? I've got proof that I've spent at least $200,000-300,000. There's proof there. The question is, why would this person do all this work if he was going to hoax a photograph? You see, so there are ways to present, use a single photograph as being proof that a species exists, even one that has everybody saying it's extinct. There are ways to use a single photograph to give it enough power so that it will be accepted as proof that the animal does exist. And if you get the right support, if you set it up in such a way that you have the right support to go with it, then one single photograph, in my view, would be enough to prove that the Tasmanian tiger is extinct, does exist. And so that's what I've been trying to do. And again, so at this stage, we've got 107 units in the bush. I've taken more than 700,000 photographs of animals. I've taken a lot of photographs of course, of wallabies and wombats, so I've proven they exist. I'll just have to keep going to until I can get a clear photograph of a thylacine. Now I have got 5 or 6 photographs of what I would say are Tasmanian tigers, but they're from infrared cameras. They're grainy, black and white. They convince me, but you know, you've got to have extraordinary evidence to prove that this thing exists. So I've made some progress, but what I need still is a clear photograph. And I never would have dreamed that it would drag on this long, that this kind of life was ahead of me when I first got into it in 1998. But here I am, still going. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to do it, but in theory, the chance has never been greater than what it is now. So that's where I'm at. So what do you reckon, Col?
What are you doing now, Col?
Well, my search has dragged on for 47 years, and Greg's in full flight and I'm slowing down. Age and physical restriction has curtailed my activities largely now, but Greg and I are on different train lines here. I go 100% what he's trying to do, but I always approach this from a different angle. I've never used remote control cameras. I'm from a different age, and I was brought up under the old trappers and the old tried and proven ideas of tracking the animal down. In the early days, I tried a variety of things, but then I settled for the same same methods as I was told worked. And well, they worked for me in that instance in '95, but the evidence, Greg's going for photos, and I say nothing short of a live or a dead animal will prove it's there. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter how authentic the photo is, there'll always be those who'll say it's been rigged, because photos are so easily rigged now. It wasn't always this way back in the earlier days with the old film photos, but now with digital it's so easily done, and the same as footprints. They're so easily made up in the bath. But you can't rig a smell, and the one I smelt in was it around 2000 was definitely a Tasmanian tiger. I checked my notes with Hans Narding, who knew the animal, who provided that infallible sighting in 1982, and just up the road here, the Roger River, not far from where Greg hunts. And he told me that it smelt like the African brown hyena, which and he described it, and it was the smell I smelt. So I've gone at it from an entirely different angle to Greg. He's one of the modern breed, and as I say, I never embraced remote control cameras. Not that they don't work or wouldn't work, but it's just not my way. I like to get out in the bush and work on my corridor theory and track the animal through the territory it hunts. And it's paid off, but then my camera was in my packed away then, and I couldn't get a photo, so I missed out that opportunity. And I've heard it calling in the bush at night, and as there's been no recordings ever made of the animal, people say, oh well, it could have been anything. But the only thing it could have been was a dog, and there were no dogs in this area that I was in, I can tell you that. So my search is winding down. I've come into the end of my day, so I've written the book. I hope to get a photo for the book before I published it, but it wasn't to be. And I thought if I don't do it soon, I'll fall off my perch and there'll be no book and no nothing. So the book's out, and it's raised a lot of interest, but I'd still like to get acid proof that it's still there, and to shoot all these skeptics down in flames, because there's so many people that knock us around and say, you know, it couldn't possibly be there, they're mad, they're nuts, to spend all this money, all this time looking for an animal that doesn't exist, but we know it does, as we've seen it, and that's a different aspect of it altogether. So what the future holds for me, I don't know. I can't do a terrible lot now, but I'm still very interested in you know, seeing this come to fruition. But I think it'll be blokes like Greg that do it, not me. My time has come and gone. So I just look to them and hope they bring home the bacon.
Now, I don't think Col's as close to falling off the perch as he imagines. I think he's doing all right. But one thing I would say is, one thing that Col's done in the past, and he continues to do, is he stands up for it. You know, people seem to be so quick to give up on this thing. You've got an incredibly valuable animal that has been on the edge of extinction, and people are so quick to give up on it. And that's one of the tragedies of this story, and people have said it in the past, commentators in the past have said, look, the worst thing about this story is that society was so quick to give up on this animal. Just imagine if it's true, what we say. Just imagine if it's true that there's an incredibly valuable animal clinging to existence in Tasmania, and the whole world seems to have given up on it. Not only that, but you've got some people that stand up and say it is extinct, and that people like Col and I are deluded for thinking otherwise. Imagine if that's true, that it is there. Then so you've, for the past 30 years and now, this man has been one of the few voices who've publicly defended it and said, look, it's there, don't give up on it, it's not extinct. Now, in 1998, I was down here, prepared to put a lot of effort into looking for the Tasmanian tiger, to try to prove that it's there for the benefit of that animal only. And all I needed was a little nudge of encouragement. And I only had 3 or 4 books to go by, and one video, one commercially available videotape, like an hour-long show presentation, and everybody on there is not real positive about it. Eric Geiler was, but also Col Bailey gets on there and he says, I want to say for the camera and on record that it's not extinct. In other words, don't give up on it. And that made a hell of a difference, because just that slight little bit of encouragement was enough for me to actually give it a try. And it was pretty clear once I did start giving it a serious go that it's not unreasonable for a logical person to believe that this thing could still exist. When you read the history, when you walk through the bush, it's not unreasonable. It's not an unreasonable thing to expect that it could be there. And then of course everything leads from that. But it's something that Col does continue to do, is stand up for it. And there's not a whole lot of voices doing that, public voices. It takes a lot of courage, of course, because you get all kinds of people saying that you're mad or you're deluded or worse. And who are they? They're nobodies. They've never walked in the bush to look for it. They haven't done the research. So anyway, that's the real value of Col's work as far as I see it. Whether he proves it or not, he's been one of the lone voices that have stood up for it. And it will be the case that if this thing is proven to exist, then the few voices that have stood up for it all these years, they will be regarded as heroes. And the people the so-called scientists who've been claiming that it's extinct, writing such things from their office somewhere in the city, they'll slink away into the shadows. And it's not about attacking people or trying to find negativity. It's not easy to soldier on for 30 years or for 15 years as I've done, with all these voices chipping away at you. And it does make you angry that you're out there busting your guts in the rain and the mud, and you get these other voices writing from their comfortable offices, and they're saying that we're wrong, and that's what's wrong. It does chip away at you. It makes what Col and I do much more difficult. So what's our next question?
Why is it important to prove the species exist?
Why is it important to prove the species exist? Largely answered that already, and the main thing is, as I keep saying, there's a fundamental concept that keeps slapping me in the face, and that is that society will not protect an animal it thinks is extinct. Now, if somebody went to the logging industry and they said, stop logging this area, the Tasmanian tiger lives there, then everybody would laugh. But if somebody proved that it exists, then nobody would laugh, and neither of us want to tell Tasmanians how to live or to stop the logging industry or stop mining. But what is important is that the Tasmanian tiger is factored into the decision-making process. And as soon as an animal is classified as endangered, like the Tasmanian devil, for example, then regulations, decision makers are required to take that animal into account when they make a decision. At the moment, who takes the Tasmanian tiger into account when they make land use decisions? Nobody, because it's extinct. From my point of view, if it needs to be proven to exist so that society can make the best judgments. Experts can gather together, the best experts that can be found can gather together, wildlife managers, and decide what to do about it. And that's not me. So I don't want to tell people what should be done, but I do see that the first step forward has to be to prove that the animal still exists. The question then, of course, is how far do you go? And how far do you go to prove it exists? What's ethical? What's logical? What's reasonable? And those questions are very difficult to answer.
So, Col, why is it important to prove the species exist?
Well, the political implications to this are all important. It's not what we think, it's what the powers that be think. And this is going to be the danger. If this animal is proven to be there and released to the media, all hell will break loose. You'll have interest coming from all over the world. I'm not kidding. I wouldn't want to be in the firing line. And if it's a publicity hound who runs to the newspaper and say, oh, I've seen the tiger, I've got the proof, well, he or she would wish they'd never been born, because they'll be hounded stupid by this. And then the danger comes with the political implications. We have governments here that don't have a clue what they're doing, not to mention the tiger. So when an important issue like this comes up, you're going to have people wading into the argument who supposed experts, but there are no experts on this animal. All those experts died years ago when the old trappers and bushmen died. So there are no experts because there's so much we don't know and we need to learn. And this is the all-important issue. Who is going to handle it and how are they going to handle it? Will be pushed aside. If it's Greg or I or whoever else, will be pushed aside because we are no one in the context of things. And it's the politicians who will reign supreme. And these politicians, by and large, are rank idiots. They get into a job, they never had experience in the job before, they're voted in for a short term, they get into the job, they're minister to this, minister for that, and the darn truth is they don't know a thing about what they're doing. So this thing, no one knows much about it. There are a few authorities that know something about it, but there's so much we don't know about it. And as old Eric Riley used to say, we don't know how much sedative to put in the tranquiliser gun. To tranquilise, we might kill it by trying to tranquilise it, because if you've got to contain it, you've got to stop it somehow, and that's the obvious thing, tranquilise a dart. But we don't know how much tranquiliser to put in the dart. So it's going to raise a myriad of awkward and important questions. And so it worries me just how it's going to be handled. And if it's not handled correctly, well, it'll be lost. And if it's not found soon, it's going to drop off. It's got to be counteracted, it's got to be curtailed, and it's got to be put into a semi-captive breeding population, and there it can be monitored by satellite navigation, radio collared, and that's the only way we're going to do it. We're not going to do it with it running around willy-nilly in the bush. It's got to be contained, and how we contain it is the big question. How do you do it? How do you contain an animal that hated to be contained in the first place? The trappers told me that they used to drop dead in the snare at the mere sight of them when they come on the scene. Others were captured and brought into zoos and stuff, and there they, on average, they only lived 3 or 4 years, and then an insidious sarcoptic mange, distemper-like virus got into the population and killed them all but a few, and those few that have survived that got away into the bush, into a secure location, and they're the ones that were the forebears of the ones that are there now. And so we don't know how we're going to handle this. We'll be pushed aside. We won't have a say in it, but I would want to, as Greg would want to have a say in what the future of the animal is, but I fear that we won't amount to anything in the context of things. So it's the politicians, political idiots, that will reign supreme in this, and how they handle it is going to be the important question. So whether they stuff it up, like they stuff everything else up, remains to be seen. But we'll do all the hard miles and they'll take all the credit. And bet your life on that.
Well, there's a couple of points that I'd like to make there, and one is there's negatives that go with proving a species exists. You know, some people say, a lot of people say, when you first think about it, on the surface, with a surface thought about it, leave it alone to breed in peace. Leave it to be happily in the bush. Well, I think that's rubbish, because after 70 years the animal's not been able to recover by itself. It's on the edge of extinction. It can go extinct at any time. So it has to be proven to be there, and not only that, there's a sense of urgency, because if it could go extinct at any time. There can't be many of them. That's the very fact that everyone thinks it's extinct. That means there can't be many there. So yes, there are negatives that go with proving that the animal's there. People talk about hunters going to hunt it. Well, I know myself, I've spent the past, since 2006, with cameras in the bush there, and since 2002 I've been busting my guts to prove it's there. I've seen it for a total of 9 seconds in the past 12 years. I don't think hunters are going to get anywhere near it. So in reality, there are some negatives that go with that, but the positives outweigh the negatives. That's the first step to helping that animal, is proving it exists. Now the other thing, what Col's talking about, how political it would be, and how politicians don't necessarily know what they're talking about. Of course that's true, but there's a couple of ways that you can go about it, and as I say, the approach that I've taken is to write a 1,000-page book. There is an accompanying scientific study that's halfway through being written, and that goes through all these. So far I've taken 700,000 photos, and I must have at least 150,000 photos of devils. I haven't actually counted them. So I'm going to write a scientific paper that goes through the whole study and presents the thylacine evidence as part of that, so that I've got a lot to go with a single photograph, as I said before. Now, there's a couple of ways you can go about it. You imagine if I took that single photograph into the museum, said, here's the proof the Tasmanian tiger exists. That'd go nowhere. If I took it to the local newspaper, that'd go nowhere. If I took it to the Wildlife Service, that'd be locked in the cabinet with all the other evidence and it'd go nowhere. But if I took that same photograph to the Royal Society of London with a whole 1,000 pages of provenance to back it up, and a lot of other support structure as well, with support from eminent people, and we came from the top and worked down. You see, come from the top and work down. Don't start from the bottom in Tasmania and work up, because that'll go nowhere. Starting from the top in London, of the scientific community, the wildlife community, and work down, and pressure will be brought to bear on the Tasmanian government and eventually the Wildlife Service officers in these various places. That's the way to do it, not work backwards, because it'll be tangled in the garden path of politics, local politics, as it has been for the past 100 years. Start from the top and work back down.
Greg, what do you say to scientists who claim the species is extinct?
Yeah, well, I think we've left that question to the last, because it's one of the most important questions as far as I can see. Is as far as the fate of this animal goes, there's two viewpoints. One is it's already extinct, or the other is that there's still a chance to save it. There's two viewpoints you can take. Now, nobody knows either way which is true, unless you've seen it for yourself, as we have. So, I mean, we can say that we know that it still exists, but someone coming into this debate, someone who's newly interested in this subject, there's two ways that you can think. One is you can think, oh, well, it's already extinct, or there is a possibility that it does exist. There's two choices. Now, you've got two voices, in other words. Some people say there's a possibility it still exists, and some say that it doesn't. Some scientific voices claim that it doesn't. And as far as I'm concerned, that's very damaging. It's a very ignorant attitude to take, and it's bad for the species, because it makes everybody take the attitude that it's already gone. Society's not going to protect an animal it thinks is extinct. So when you have a scientific viewpoint, you know, anybody can say whatever they think, but when you have someone who writes a very well-written scientific book, and they say that the species is definitely extinct, that's very damaging for the species, for a species which is trying to hang on against the odds. One of the odds is that everybody seems to have given up on it, and as far as I can see, a lot of society, certainly in Tasmania, actually hopes that this thing will not be rediscovered. And that's a can of worms in itself, because you've got local people, certainly on the west coast of Tasmania, who've got a lot to lose if the Tasmanian tiger is rediscovered. And it's not about that they hate the animal or anything like that, but certainly since I've been living here for 10 years, I understand where the viewpoint comes from. There's pluses and minuses of living on the west coast here. The minuses are you've got bad weather, isolation, but the pluses have always been that for generations you can go wherever you want. And local people know that if the Tasmanian tiger was rediscovered, you'll have World Heritage, National Park, World Wildlife bodies down on you like a ton of bricks. They are very protective of their freedoms, because that's what makes it worth living here. If you take that away, all people are left with is the negatives, and the local people don't want to move. They've been here for generations. And yet you'll have someone from outside, Hobart or Sydney, saying, make it World Heritage, make it a national park. But you see, they've got nothing to lose. So since I've been living on this coast, I do understand where the viewpoint comes from of local people here. And the logging industry, you imagine what would happen to the logging industry if the Tasmanian tiger was rediscovered. There are various groups, say for example the National Parks and Wildlife Service would be and Cole would understand that, they would be completely in complete disarray if this thing was rediscovered. Not only what to do about it now, and I'd suggest totally incapable of dealing with the issue, because again, I'm not going to go too far into that. I don't want to be negative, but you've got a body there that, as far as I'm concerned, would be totally incapable of dealing with the issue of the Tasmanian tiger, and I think most within that body would understand that. So you've got various groups of society who dread the idea of the Tasmanian tiger being rediscovered. Obviously everybody would like to see that, but everybody also perhaps has a sense of dread of what would happen if that comes along. Some groups have been waiting for an eminent scientist to stand up and say the Tasmanian tiger is extinct, because that's an excuse, if you like, to give up on it, to say, for example, the Wildlife Service. That body, in theory, has a statutory response to protect wildlife in Tasmania. That's the theory. So that means that body is responsible to respond to sightings or reports that the thing's still there, or the idea that there's still a chance to save it. But if an eminent scientist presents a well-written book and says the Tasmanian tiger is definitely extinct, well, that gives everybody an excuse, you see, to give up on it. And the problem is, the book that I'm talking about was written by Robert Paddle in the year 2000. Now, a very well-written book, and even the cover of that book says that it presents with no uncertainty that the animal is extinct. Now, the problem I see with that is that the writer, did he ever set foot in the bush to look for it? The writer's never been in the bush to look for it, and effectively ignored everything after 1936, when the animal died the last one died in the zoo. Didn't consider any of the sightings, any of the logic that says that it's still there. What kind of world is it where that is taken as gospel by a lot of groups? And it has been. As I say, it's a very well written book. A lot of people have now, that in itself has become the benchmark of opinion on the Tasmanian tiger, and it's extinct. And there's also various wildlife measures that can be used. The 50-year rule, for example, that says if you haven't seen something for 50 years, then it's extinct. There's various measures that can be taken, but a scientist who stands up and says it is extinct does have a lot of influence, and I think that is damaging for the Tasmanian tiger. And so I use Robert Paddle as an example, but there's plenty of others who'll flippantly say it's extinct. And who are these people? You know, they call themselves scientists. Well, I'm a scientist. I've got 2 degrees in environmental science, and I say the thing is not extinct. I've seen it, and I spent a lot of time walking through the bush, more time than these people have, and I can tell you that it is not extinct. So when I hear that a scientist, someone who claims authority, stand up and say it's extinct, it's infuriating. And Cole will understand that fully well. He'll repeat exactly the same thing. So in answer to the question, what do I say to scientists who claim the species is extinct? What I say is, you don't know that. So please don't stand up and claim that it's extinct, because it's very damaging doing it. Give it a chance. Don't be so quick to give up on it. And one thing I would say is, history will remember those who defended the Tasmanian tiger in its darkest hour, and history will also remember those who didn't. So anyway, that's what I'd say. Right, Cole.
So, Cole, what do you say to the scientists who claim the species is extinct?
Well, how many times have they said this through European history? Gould warned us in the 1850s that the animal was on the verge of extinction, and various ones since then, right up until the bounty scheme took effect in 1888, have said the animal's on the verge of extinction. We don't see any, they must be extinct. And yet in 1888, the bounty scheme came into being, and that was brought about by farmers on the east coast saying they were killing thousands of sheep annually. In fact, tigers were killing more sheep than were actually there. And so that gives you a bit of an idea of that argument. And then during the bounty years, the 21 years it ran, there were 20 whatever it was years, at 21 years, there were around 3,000 odd killed, 2,100 and something on the official government bounty, and then private bounties accounted for almost another 1,000. So there were still 3,000 tigers here, and yet only years before they were saying it was extinct. But that definitely weeded it out. And then the distemper-like disease that followed weeded more out. And so by the time of the First World War, they were getting fairly rare. And the years since, well, in 1936 to say that was the last tiger that died in the Hobart Zoo, it's ridiculous. The last captive tiger that we know of, but it certainly wasn't the last living tiger. But over the years since, its numbers have decreased. It can inbreed, I'm sure of that. Otherwise it would have bred itself out. And no one's ever proven that it can't, and there are certain marsupials that can inbreed, another, like the African cheetah, can inbreed. So we know that there is possibility that it's hung on, a big possibility. But just how many are there, well, we don't know. No one knows that. Some would venture to say dozens. I would venture to say a few, but how many, no one knows. The important fact is it is still there, and what happens in the future, well, who knows. But it's there at the moment, and that's the important thing. The scientists, well, they just don't know. They never get out of their comfortable armchairs and get out in the bush and find out, with the exception of Eric Geiler and Nick Mooney.
And the ones that do, they're the ones that say that it is still there, or at least give it a chance.
Well, Nick Mooney has probably got out more than anyone from the government and looked for it. And he's come out in the last few months and said he thinks the door is still open. There's a chance it's still there. Well, there's a pretty good, it's pretty good for him to say that, because it's what old Eric was saying till the day he died. In fact, he was up here looking for it when he had his massive stroke. So, what the scientists say in general means nothing, because they just don't know. And we are of no account. What we say doesn't matter. But if we were to find it, maybe the tide would change. But scientific opinion doesn't worry me. I mean, we're called all sorts by different people. But we know what we know, and that's the important thing.
Well, you're a true believer, which has connotations that you believe in something that's a myth, or you believe in some religious...
Impossible dream, yeah.
You're a dreamer who believes in some religious thing.
Yeah. It's like a religion, I suppose. You know, you believe without seeing.
But you have seen
it. Yes, that's right. But normally we can't. I mean, we don't go out. Every time we go out, we don't see it. So it's a bit like a religion and believing something you can't see.
Yeah, but you only have to take one look at the bush and the history, and a logical person who actually looks at it, not just who has a one-off thought about it, but who actually looks at it. Yeah. You'd have to say that it is reasonable that the thing can still be there. So this term, true believer, that's a derogatory term as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. But we know what we know, which is a darn sight more than the scientists know, fairly, and that's the essence of the contract.
Well, that's probably about it.
Cut.
So thanks for doing that for us.